The frozen wind cut through Zelda Norton's threadbare dress like 1,000 knives as she stumbled through the streets of Hachita, New Mexico, her fingertips already numb and her lips turning blue in the bitter January night of 1884. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and the temperature was dropping fast enough that she knew she might not survive until dawn if she did not find shelter soon. Her stepfather had thrown her out with nothing but the clothes on her back after she had refused his drunken advances, and her mother had stood by and watched, too broken and afraid to intervene. The small mining town was dark and silent, most folks having retreated indoors hours ago to escape the unseasonable cold snap that had descended upon the New Mexico territory like a curse from an angry god. Zelda's teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper as she wrapped her arms around herself and tried to keep moving. Her feet were going numb in her worn boots, and she could barely feel her toes anymore. The buildings of Hachita seemed to blur together in the darkness, lit only by the occasional flickering lamplight from a window. She knew she was in trouble, real trouble, the kind that ended with frozen bodies being discovered at first light. Desperation clawed at her chest as she stumbled forward, her vision starting to tunnel from the cold. Then she saw it, a small cabin set back from the main street with smoke curling from its chimney and warm golden light spilling from the windows. It looked like heaven itself to her frozen eyes. Zelda did not care anymore about propriety or what people might think. She stumbled up to the door and knocked, her knuckles so numb she could barely feel them hitting the wood. When no one answered immediately, she knocked again, harder this time, her breath coming in desperate gasps that turned to white clouds in the freezing air. The door swung open, and Zelda found herself staring up at a tall man with dark hair and concerned gray eyes. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of someone who spent his days working cattle under the harsh New Mexico sun. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and then Zelda felt her knees buckle. "Please," she managed to whisper through her chattering teeth. "I have nowhere else to go." The cowboy did not hesitate. He caught her before she could fall and swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. The warmth of his body and the cabin behind him hit Zelda like a physical force, making her gasp. She tried to speak, to explain, but her jaw was locked from the cold. "Do not try to talk yet," the man said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle as he carried her inside and kicked the door shut behind them. "You are half frozen. We need to get you warm before anything else." He set her down in a chair near the fireplace, and Zelda could not help but lean toward the flames like a flower seeking the sun. The man disappeared for a moment and returned with several thick blankets, which he wrapped around her shoulders and legs with an efficiency that spoke of experience. Then he knelt before her and began carefully removing her frozen boots. "My name is Knox Hamilton," he said as he worked, his hands gentle despite their size and obvious strength. "I am a ranch hand for the Three Rivers outfit about 5 miles north of town. This is my place, such as it is. You are safe here." Zelda wanted to respond, to tell him her name and thank him for his kindness, but she was still shaking too hard to form coherent words. Knox seemed to understand this because he simply continued his ministrations, rubbing her feet carefully to restore circulation. The pain as feeling began to return was excruciating, and Zelda could not stop the tears that leaked from the corners of her eyes. "I know it hurts," Knox said quietly. "That is actually a good sign. It means there is no serious damage. You got inside just in time." He moved to her hands next, rubbing warmth back into her frozen fingers with the same careful attention. Zelda watched him through her tears, stunned by the tenderness this rough cowboy was showing a complete stranger. Men in her experience were not like this. They took what they wanted and gave nothing back. But Knox Hamilton seemed different. After what felt like an eternity, Zelda's shaking began to subside enough for her to speak. "Zelda," she managed through still chattering teeth. "My name is Zelda Norton. Thank you for saving my life." Knox looked up at her then, really looked at her, and Zelda saw something shift in his gray eyes. She knew what he must be seeing. A girl of 19 with long, dark hair and brown eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone so young. Her dress was worn and patched, and she had the gaunt look of someone who had gone hungry more often than not. But there was still pride in the way she held her head, a stubborn determination that refused to be beaten down. "What happened to you, Miss Norton?" Knox asked gently. "How did you end up out there on a night like this?" Zelda closed her eyes, shame washing over her, but she owed this man the truth after what he had done for her. "My stepfather threw me out," she said quietly. "He had been drinking, and he tried to force himself on me. When I fought back, he dragged me to the door and tossed me into the street. My mother did nothing to stop him." She heard Knox's sharp intake of breath and opened her eyes to see fury blazing in his face. But when he spoke, his voice remained controlled. "That man is a coward and a monster," he said flatly, "and you are not going back there, ever." "I do not have anywhere else to go," Zelda whispered. "I have no family besides them, no money, nothing." Knox was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he stood and crossed to the small stove in the corner of the cabin. "Right now, you need hot food and rest," he said. "We can figure out the rest tomorrow. I have stew from supper I can warm up." "When is the last time you ate?" Zelda had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think." "Maybe the morning before." "I am not sure." Knox's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he busied himself with the stew. Zelda took the opportunity to look around the cabin. It was small but well-maintained, with a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and the fireplace that was currently saving her life. The floor was swept clean, and everything seemed to have its place. It was the home of a man who took care of what was his. When Knox brought her a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread, Zelda had to force herself not to bolt it down like an animal. The food was simple but delicious, and she felt strength beginning to seep back into her frozen body with each bite. Knox sat across from her with his own bowl, watching her with those thoughtful gray eyes. "You said you work for the Three Rivers outfit?" Zelda asked between bites, needing to fill the silence. Knox nodded. "Have been for about 3 years now. Good outfit, fair bosses. The work is hard but honest. I have been saving up to buy my own land someday, maybe start a small ranch of my own." "That sounds like a good dream," Zelda said softly. "What about you, Miss Norton? What are your dreams?" The question caught Zelda off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. She had to think about it. "I suppose I never let myself dream much," she admitted. "Survival seemed like enough of a goal, but if I could have anything, I think I would want a family. A real family where people take care of each other and nobody raises their hand in anger." Something in Knox's expression softened. "That is a fine dream," he said quietly. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Knox stood and began arranging blankets on the floor near the fire. "You take the bed tonight," he said. "I will be comfortable enough down here." "I cannot take your bed," Zelda protested. "You have already done so much." Knox gave her a look that brooked no argument. "Miss Norton, you nearly froze to death tonight. You need proper rest in a warm bed. I have slept in worse places than a floor by a fire, believe me. Now get some sleep. We will talk more in the morning." Zelda was too exhausted to argue further. She made her way to the bed on shaky legs and collapsed onto it, still wrapped in the blankets Knox had given her. The mattress was thin but clean, and it felt like the most luxurious thing she had ever experienced. Within moments, she was asleep. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and afraid, but each time she saw Knox's form by the fire and remembered she was safe. Each time, she fell back asleep a little easier. When dawn light began filtering through the cabin's single window, Zelda woke to find Knox already up and making coffee on the stove. The smell was heavenly, and her stomach rumbled despite the meal she had eaten the night before. "Good morning," Knox said when he noticed she was awake. "How are you feeling?" Zelda took stock of herself. Her fingers and toes ached and she felt bruised all over, but she was alive and warm. "Better," she said honestly. "Thanks to you." Knox poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her. Zelda accepted it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. Knox pulled the chair over and sat facing her, his expression serious. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "I meant what I said last night. You are not going back to that house. But you are going to need somewhere to stay and some way to support yourself." Zelda nodded, her heart sinking. She had been thinking about the same thing. "I can work," she said. "I am strong and I am not afraid of hard work. Maybe one of the businesses in town needs help, or someone needs a cook or a cleaning woman." Knox was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally, he spoke. "I have a proposal for you, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything. You could stay here with me." "Before you protest, let me explain. I am gone most days working the ranch. You would have the cabin to yourself. In exchange for room and board, you could keep the place clean, do the cooking, maybe tend a small garden when spring comes. It would give you a safe place to stay and time to figure out your next step." Zelda stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. But what would people say? An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. I would be ruined and your reputation would suffer too. "I do not give a damn about what people say," Knox said flatly. "And anyone who would judge you for trying to survive is not worth knowing anyway. But if it bothers you, we could tell people you are my cousin, visiting from back east. Why would you do this for me?" Zelda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not even know me." Knox met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because I have a warm place and food enough for 2 and you have neither. Because no decent person would turn someone out into the cold to die. And maybe because I know what it is like to be alone in the world with nobody to turn to." There was old pain in his voice, and Zelda found herself wanting to know his story. But right now, she had to make a decision about her own future. Every instinct told her to be cautious, that accepting such an offer from a man she barely knew was dangerous. But those same instincts also told her that Knox Hamilton was different from other men she had known. He had already proven himself to be honorable, and what choice did she really have? She could not go back to her stepfather's house, and she doubted any respectable business in town would hire her once word got out about what had happened. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your offer, Mr. Hamilton, and I promise I will earn my keep. You will not regret helping me." Relief flickered across Knox's face. "Just Knox, please, and I do not think I will regret it at all, Miss Norton." "Zelda," she corrected with a small smile. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, even as supposed cousins, we should probably use first names." "Zelda it is, then," Knox said, returning her smile. The first few days were awkward as they learned to navigate sharing the small space. Knox was true to his word, leaving at dawn each day to work at the Three Rivers Ranch and not returning until well after dark. Zelda spent her days cleaning the cabin from top to bottom, washing clothes and preparing hot meals for when Knox returned. She found that she enjoyed the work, taking pride in making the little cabin into a real home. Knox never made her feel uncomfortable or threatened. He was respectful to a fault, always making sure she had privacy when she needed it and never touching her except by accident. But Zelda found herself watching him when he thought she was not looking, noticing the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, or how his hands were scarred from years of hard work, but still capable of surprising gentleness. On the fourth day, there was a knock at the cabin door. Zelda opened it to find a thin woman in her 40s with graying blonde hair and kind blue eyes. "You must be Knox's cousin from back east," the woman said with a smile. "I am Sarah Brennan. My husband Tom and I have the place about a mile down the road. I brought you some preserves as a welcome gift." Zelda accepted the jars gratefully, inviting Sarah inside for coffee. She felt guilty about the lie, but Knox had been right about needing a story to tell people. Over coffee, Sarah filled her in on all the local gossip, and Zelda found herself genuinely liking the older woman. "Knox is a good man," Sarah said as she was preparing to leave. "He keeps to himself mostly, but he has helped Tom with repairs more times than I can count. Never takes payment either, just says neighbors should help each other. You are lucky to have family like that." After Sarah left, Zelda found herself thinking about her words. Knox was a good man, perhaps the first truly good man she had ever known. The thought both comforted and frightened her. That evening when Knox came home, Zelda told him about Sarah's visit. He listened carefully, then nodded. "The Brennans are good people. Sarah makes the best apple preserves in the territory." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Knox would come home to find dinner waiting and the cabin warm and welcoming. They would eat together, and then Zelda would clean up while Knox tended to small repairs or maintenance tasks. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Knox told her about his day at the ranch, about the cattle and horses he worked with, about the land he hoped to buy someday. Zelda told him about her childhood, about the mother who had loved her once before marrying a man who had slowly broken her spirit. One evening, about 3 weeks after Zelda had arrived, they were sitting by the fire when Knox suddenly spoke. "I have been thinking," he said carefully. "Spring is coming in a few months, and when it does, there will be work available all over the territory. If you want to move on, find your own place, I will help you. I have some money saved and I could stake you to a fresh start wherever you want to go." Zelda felt her heart drop into her stomach. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Knox looked at her, startled. "No," he said firmly. "That is not what I meant at all. I just wanted you to know that you have options, that you are not trapped here if you do not want to be." "And if I do want to be here?" Zelda asked softly. "What then?" Knox was quiet for a long moment, and in the firelight, Zelda could see conflict warring in his expression. "Then you stay," he finally said, "for as long as you want." Something shifted between them that night, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to name. Zelda found herself increasingly aware of Knox's presence, of the way her heart sped up when he came through the door each evening, of how empty the cabin felt during the long days when he was gone. February brought warmer weather, and with it came trouble. Zelda was at the general store, picking up supplies, when she ran into her stepfather. Martin Norton was a big man gone to fat, with mean little eyes and the broken blood vessels of a heavy drinker. When he saw Zelda, those eyes lit up with malicious pleasure. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "If it is not my wayward stepdaughter, living with that cowboy I hear, calling yourself his cousin," he laughed, an ugly sound. "We all know what you really are, girl. You are just like your mother, a whore who will spread her legs for anyone who offers a roof over her head." The store went silent. Zelda felt her face burn with humiliation and rage, Before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. "You will apologize to the lady, Norton, or I will make you wish you had." Zelda turned to see Knox standing in the doorway of the store, his face like thunder. He had come into town to pick up supplies for the ranch, and the timing could not have been more perfect. Martin Norton took one look at Knox's expression and paled, but he was too drunk and stupid to back down. "She is no lady," Martin sneered. "She is a lying little tease who needs to be taught her place." Knox moved so fast that Zelda barely saw it. One moment he was standing by the door, and the next he had Martin Norton by the front of his shirt, lifting him nearly off his feet. "You threw a 19-year-old girl out into a freezing night to die because she would not let you rape her," Knox said, his voice deadly quiet. "You are a coward and a bully, and if you ever speak to or about Zelda again, I will make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand me?" Martin managed a jerky nod, and Knox released him, letting him stumble backward. Then Knox turned to the rest of the people in the store, who were all watching with wide eyes. "Zelda Norton is a good woman who has done nothing wrong except try to survive," he said clearly. "Anyone who says different will answer to me." He took Zelda's arm gently and guided her out of the store. She was shaking, though whether from anger or fear or relief she could not say. Knox led her to where his horse was tied and helped her up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. They rode back to the cabin in silence, but Zelda found herself leaning back against Knox's solid warmth, drawing comfort from his presence. When they reached the cabin, Knox helped her down and then stood looking at her with troubled eyes. "I am sorry," he said. "I should not have lost my temper like that. I may have made things worse for you." "You defended me," Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. "No one has ever defended me before. Thank you." "He had no right to speak to you that way," Knox said fiercely. "And what he did to you, throwing you out like that, it was unforgivable. If I had been there that night, I would have killed him." The intensity in his voice made Zelda's breath catch. She took a step closer to him, looking up into his face. "Knox, why did you really let me stay here?" "Please, I need to know the truth." Knox was quiet for so long that Zelda thought he might not answer. Then he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Because from the moment I saw you standing on my doorstep, half frozen and fighting to survive, I could not imagine turning you away. Because I have been alone for so long, and you made this cabin feel like a home. Because every day I come back here and you are here, and it is the best part of my day." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "Because I am falling in love with you, Zelda Norton, and I do not know what to do about it." Zelda felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You could start by kissing me," she whispered. Knox needed no further invitation. He cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and reverent and full of all the things neither of them had words for yet. Zelda wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer you," he said quietly. "Just a ranch hand's wages and a small cabin and a heart that is yours if you want it." "That is everything I ever wanted," Zelda said, smiling through her tears. "A good man who treats me with kindness and respect, a home where I feel safe. That is worth more than all the riches in the world." They went inside together, and that night, Knox did not sleep by the fire. They lay together in the narrow bed, fully clothed but wrapped in each other's arms, talking softly until sleep claimed them both. It felt right in a way nothing had ever felt right before in Zelda's life. The next morning, Knox surprised her over breakfast. "I have been thinking," he said. I know it is fast, but nothing about the way we got together has been conventional anyway. Zelda, I want to marry you. Not because I feel obligated or because it would make things more respectable, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you be my wife? Zelda set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Knox, I will marry you. They were married 3 days later by the circuit judge who came through Hachita once a month. Sarah and Tom Brennan served as witnesses, beaming with joy at the match. Sarah had helped Zelda make over one of her old dresses into something suitable for a wedding, and Knox wore his best shirt and a new string tie he had bought special for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Knox slipped the simple gold band onto Zelda's finger, she felt something inside her settle into place. She was no longer alone, no longer unwanted. She belonged somewhere to someone, and he belonged to her in return. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and wonderful all at once. Knox was patient with Zelda's nervousness, taking his time to show her what being with a man could be like when it was done with love and care. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Zelda felt truly happy for the first time in her life. I love you, she whispered against Knox's chest. I love you too, he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I promise I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret this, Zelda said with absolute certainty. Life settled into a new rhythm after their marriage. Knox continued working at the Three Rivers Ranch, but now he came home to a wife who loved him, who had dinner waiting and greeted him with a kiss each evening. Zelda threw herself into making their little cabin a true home, planting a garden as soon as the weather warmed enough, and becoming friends with the other ranch wives in the area. 2 months after their wedding, Knox came home with news. The boss called me into his office today, he said, and Zelda's heart leaped into her throat, afraid he had been fired. But Knox was grinning. He is getting too old to run the whole operation himself, and he offered me the position of foreman. It comes with better pay and a bigger house on ranch property. Knox, that is wonderful, Zelda exclaimed, throwing her arms around him, but Knox gently disentangled himself, his expression turning serious. There is more. He is also willing to sell me a section of land on the edge of the ranch property at a fair price. It is good grazing land with water access. Zelda, we could start our own place, build our own ranch. It would take years of hard work, and we would have to be careful with every penny, but it is possible. Then we should do it, Zelda said without hesitation. I am not afraid of hard work, and neither are you. Let us build something together, something that is ours. They moved into the foreman's house in April, a larger cabin with 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Zelda loved it immediately, already planning how she would fix it up. Knox negotiated the land purchase with his boss and began making plans for their future ranch. They would start small, with a few head of cattle and a couple of horses, and build from there. That summer was one of the happiest times of Zelda's life. She worked alongside Knox when she could, learning about cattle and horses and ranching. She tended her garden and helped with the roundup, proving herself as capable as any ranch hand. The other men respected her, and their wives embraced her as one of their own. In August, Zelda realized she had not had her monthly courses in nearly 2 months. At first she was not sure, but as the weeks passed and her breasts became tender and she started feeling queasy in the mornings, the truth became undeniable. She was carrying Knox's child. She told him one evening after dinner, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. There is a baby, she said softly. Our baby. Knox's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked stunned. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Zelda had ever seen, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down before she got dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," Knox kept saying, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." "And I am going to be a mother," Zelda said, a little frightened by the prospect but mostly excited. "A good mother, the kind my mother was before she forgot how." "You are going to be an amazing mother," Knox said firmly. "Our child is the luckiest kid in the world." The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Knox worried constantly, bringing her ginger tea and crackers and sitting with her through the worst of it. But by the 4th month, the sickness passed, and Zelda began to bloom. She loved feeling the baby move inside her, loved watching her belly grow, loved the way Knox would talk to the baby through her skin each night before they went to sleep. In February of 1885, just over a year after Knox had opened his door to a freezing girl on the worst night of her life, Zelda went into labor. Sarah Brennan came to help, along with another ranch wife named Martha who had delivered half a dozen babies. Knox paced outside for hours, wearing a path in the frozen ground, until finally Sarah opened the door with a huge smile. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Zelda came through it just fine." Knox rushed inside to find Zelda propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Knox, meet your son," she said softly. Knox sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. His son had a fuzz of dark hair and was making little snuffling sounds as he slept. Knox felt his eyes fill with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I did not know it was possible to love this much." They named him James Thomas Hamilton, after Knox's father and Zelda's grandfather, the only member of her family who had ever been kind to her. Little James was a good baby, healthy and strong, and both parents doted on him shamelessly. As winter gave way to spring, Knox began building on their land. He worked every spare minute, and soon a small cabin began to take shape. It was not much at first, just one room and a loft, but it was theirs, built on land that belonged to them. Other ranch hands helped when they could, and by summer, the cabin was finished enough to move into. Their first night in their own home, on their own land, was special. Knox lit a fire in the hearth he had built with his own hands while Zelda nursed James in the rocking chair that had been Sarah's gift to them. When the baby was asleep, Knox sat on the floor next to Zelda's chair and rested his head against her knee. "We did it," he said quietly. "We built this." "We did," Zelda agreed, running her fingers through his hair. "And we will build more. This is just the beginning." She was right. Over the next few years, their little ranch grew. They bought more cattle, then more horses. Knox proved to have an eye for good horseflesh, and soon their horses were sought after throughout the territory. Zelda kept the books and managed the household, proving to have a sharp mind for business. They worked harder than they had ever worked in their lives, but they worked together, partners in every sense of the word. In 1887, Zelda had their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Grace. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was as different from James as night from day. Where James was serious and thoughtful, Caroline was all fire and energy, running before she could properly walk and climbing everything in sight. Knox adored both his children equally, but he had a special soft spot for his little girl. By 1889, their ranch was thriving. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Knox had built additions onto the cabin until it was a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a spacious kitchen. Zelda had her parlor where she could entertain the other ranch wives, and Knox had an office where he managed the ranch business. One evening in the spring of that year, as they sat on their front porch watching James and Caroline play in the yard, Zelda leaned against Knox's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "The night I showed up at your door half frozen." "Every day," Knox admitted. "I think about how easily I might have never met you. What if I had been at the ranch that night instead of in town? What if you had gone to a different door?" "But I did not," Zelda said. "I came to your door and you opened it. You saved my life that night, Knox." "No," Knox said, turning to look at her with love shining in his eyes. "You saved mine. I was existing before you, just going through the motions. You taught me how to really live. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving each day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Hamilton." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes as she kissed him. "We saved each other," she said, "and we built something beautiful together." In 1891, they welcomed their third child, another son they named Thomas after Tom Brennan, who had become like a father to both of them. By then, James was 6 years old and already helping around the ranch, and Caroline was 4 and convinced she could do anything her older brother could do. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Tom Brennan passed away in 1893, and Knox helped Sarah manage their place until she decided to sell it and move back east to live with her daughter. Zelda cried when Sarah left, having lost the closest thing to a mother she had known since childhood. But Sarah made her promise to keep living a good life and to never take for granted what she and Knox had built together. In 1895, Zelda received word that her mother had died. She felt surprisingly little grief, having made peace long ago with the fact that her mother had chosen her husband over her daughter. But she did attend the funeral, Knox at her side for support. Martin Norton was there, looking older and more broken, his drinking having taken a heavy toll. He did not speak to Zelda, and she did not acknowledge his presence. That chapter of her life was closed. By the turn of the century, the Hamilton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. James was 15 and already a skilled horseman and rancher. Caroline was 13 and helping her mother manage the household and the ranch books. Thomas was 9 and showing signs of having his father's eye for cattle. Knox and Zelda had built something that would last, something they could pass on to their children and grandchildren. But more than the material success, they had built a marriage based on love and respect and partnership. They still sat together on their porch each evening when the work was done, still reached for each other in the night, still found ways to make each other laugh even after years of marriage. Their love had not dimmed with time, but had instead deepened and matured into something even more precious than those first passionate days. In 1903, James announced his intention to marry Emma Patterson, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was a grand affair, and Zelda cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn son pledge his life to a good woman. Seeing James and Emma together reminded her of those early days with Knox, full of hope and promise. Caroline, independent and headstrong, had no interest in marriage yet. She wanted to go to school, to learn more about ranching and business. Knox and Zelda supported her dreams, even though it was unusual for a young woman to have such ambitions. They had not raised their children to accept the limitations others might try to impose on them. In 1905, Zelda realized she was pregnant again at the age of 40. It was a surprise, as she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but not an unwelcome one. Knox was concerned about her health, but Zelda was strong and healthy, and the pregnancy went smoothly. In January of 1906, she gave birth to their fourth child, a daughter they named Sarah, after the woman who had been such a good friend to them both. Little Sarah's birth felt like a gift, a reminder that life still held surprises and joys even as they grew older. James and Emma doted on their baby sister, and Caroline finally seemed to mellow a bit, spending hours rocking the baby and singing to her. In 1908, James and Emma welcomed Zelda and Knox's first grandchild, a boy they named Knox after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Knox felt the weight of years and the swift passage of time. He was 51 years old now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, his hands more scarred and weathered than ever. But he was healthy and strong, and he had lived to see his son become a father. It was more than he had ever dared dream of on those lonely years before Zelda had come into his life. Caroline eventually did marry, at age 27, to a schoolteacher named Daniel Wright, who shared her passion for learning and her independent spirit. It was a good match, and they built a life together in town, though Caroline still came out to the ranch regularly to help with the books and business decisions. Thomas took over more and more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Knox began to slow down. Not that Knox was ready to retire. He still rode out with the men most days and oversaw the important decisions, but he was content to let his son shoulder more of the burden. He had worked hard his whole life and felt no shame in easing back a bit as he entered his 50s and then his 60s. Sarah grew into a lovely young woman, as beautiful as her mother but with her father's steady temperament. She eventually married in 1926 at the age of 20, and by then, Knox and Zelda had 7 grandchildren with more on the way. The years had been kind to them overall. They had their share of hardships, drought years when the cattle suffered, harsh winters that tested their endurance, the loss of friends and loved ones to age and illness. But they faced everything together, and their love never wavered. In 1930, as they sat on their porch on a warm summer evening, Knox reached over and took Zelda's hand. They were both in their 60s now, gray-haired and lined with age, but the spark between them was still there. Zelda turned to look at him, a question in her eyes. "You know what day it is?" Knox asked. Zelda thought for a moment, then her eyes widened. 46 years, she said softly. 46 years ago tonight, I knocked on your door half frozen and afraid, and you let me in. Best decision I ever made, Knox said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. You have given me a beautiful life, Zelda Hamilton. I fall in love with you more with every passing year. And I with you, Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. You opened your door and your heart to me that night, Knox, and you changed everything. You showed me what love really means, what family really means. Everything good in my life comes from that moment when you chose to help a desperate stranger. You were never a stranger, Knox said. From the moment I saw you, I felt like I had been waiting for you my whole life. I just did not know it until then. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. The ranch was quiet, the day's work done, their children and grandchildren settled in their own homes. In a few hours, some of the family would arrive for Sunday dinner as they did every week, filling the house with noise and laughter and love. But for now, it was just the two of them as it had been in the beginning. I want you to know something, Zelda said after a while. If I could go back and change things, if I could erase all the hardship and pain that came before I met you, I would not. Because all of it led me to your door that night. All of it was worth it to have this life with you. Knox felt his throat tighten with emotion. I feel the same way, he said quietly. Every moment of loneliness, every struggle, it all meant something because it brought me to you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained on their porch, hands clasped. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted nearly 5 decades. The freezing night that had nearly killed Zelda had instead given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. And the cowboy who had opened his door had found that opening his heart was the greatest gift he could have given himself. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started with one. It was a story of daily choices, of showing up for each other day after day, year after year. It was a story of building something together, of weathering storms and celebrating triumphs side by side. It was a story of a love that had been forged in the harsh reality of the Wild West and had proven itself strong enough to last a lifetime. As they finally rose to go inside, Knox pulled Zelda close and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Zelda asked. "For knocking on my door, for staying, for loving me, for giving me everything." Zelda smiled up at him, her eyes still bright despite the lines around them. "Thank you for opening it," she replied. "For saving me, for loving me, for giving me a home." They walked inside together, into the house they had built, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created. And if their steps were slower than they had been 46 years ago, their love was no less strong. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire of love that would endure long after they were gone, carried on in their children and grandchildren, and in the story of a freezing night, a desperate girl, and a cowboy who had opened his door and his heart. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and Knox lived long enough to see his grandchildren begin to have children of their own. In 1935, at the age of 78, Knox fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Zelda's devoted nursing and the best medical care they could afford, he knew his time was coming to an end. As his family gathered around his bedside, he held tight to Zelda's hand. "I am not afraid," he told her. "I have lived a full life, a good life. I have loved and been loved. That is more than most people ever get." "Do not leave me," Zelda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know how to be without you." "You are the strongest person I know," Knox said, his voice weak but steady. "You survived things that would have broken most people long before you ever met me. You will survive this too, and it is not forever. We will find each other again, wherever we go next." He died peacefully in his sleep that night, Zelda lying beside him as she had for 51 years of marriage. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Knox had touched over the decades. Story after story was told of his kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help anyone in need. Zelda grieved deeply but did not break. Knox had been right. She was strong, forged in the fires of hardship long ago. She remained on the ranch, helping where she could, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of the legacy she and Knox had built together. She lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1943 at the age of 78. Her last words, whispered to Sarah who sat at her bedside, were simple. "Tell him I am coming. Tell Knox I am finally coming home." They buried her next to Knox on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the wide New Mexico sky they had both loved. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their lives, but also an inscription that Zelda had requested years earlier. He opened his door. She opened his heart. Together they built a love that death cannot part. The Hamilton Ranch continued for generations, passed down from parents to children, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair, and partnership over solitude. And while the details of that freezing January night in 1884 faded from living memory, the legacy of it lived on in every descendant who inherited not just land and cattle, but the example of a love that had transformed two broken, lonely people into something greater than either could have been alone. In the end, Zelda Norton and Knox Hamilton's story was not about being rescued or rescuing. It was about two people finding each other at exactly the right moment and choosing to build a life together. It was about doors that opened at the perfect time and hearts that were brave enough to love despite every reason not to. It was about the power of human kindness and the resilience of the human spirit. And it was about the truth that sometimes, in our darkest moments, salvation comes not in the form we expect, but in exactly the form we need. A freezing night, a desperate knock, a door opening, and two lives forever changed. That was their beginning, and from that beginning came decades of love, family, hardship overcome together, and joy multiplied by being shared. It was, in every sense, a life well lived, a love well earned, and a story worth telling for generations to come.